8 years after Caleb Mercer killed 3 men to save a bleeding Apache girl from outlaws, she rode back into his life with her 2 sisters flanking her. They hadn't come to thank him. They had come to make him their husband, all 3 of them. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The Arizona sun hung low over the desert mesa, casting long shadows across the weathered porch of Caleb Mercer's ranch house. At 34, he had grown accustomed to solitude, the kind that settles into a man's bones when he's spent too many years talking more to horses than to people. His spread wasn't the biggest in the territory, but it was his, bought with blood and sweat and the kind of determination that only a man with nothing to lose could muster. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, the eternal perfume of the frontier. And Caleb leaned against the porch rail, watching the horizon as he did every evening, waiting for nothing in particular and expecting even less. That was when he saw them. 3 figures on horseback, emerging from the heat shimmer like spirits conjured from the desert itself. They rode with the easy grace of people born to the saddle, their silhouettes growing clearer with each passing moment. Caleb's hand moved instinctively to the Colt at his hip, years of frontier living having taught him that unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. But as the riders drew closer, he felt something stir in his chest, a memory so old he had almost convinced himself it was a dream. The woman in the center rode a paint horse, her long dark hair flowing behind her like a banner of midnight silk. Even from a distance, there was something familiar about the way she held herself, proud and straight, with the bearing of someone who had never learned to bow before anyone or anything. The 2 women flanking her were equally striking, their features sharp and beautiful, their eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his mouth go dry. They stopped at the edge of his property, and for a long moment, no one spoke. The desert wind whispered between them, carrying secrets older than the mountains that rose purple and distant on the horizon. Then the woman in the center dismounted with fluid grace, her feet barely stirring the dust as she landed. She wore traditional Apache clothing, beaded and fringed, but there was nothing old-fashioned about the fire in her eyes or the confident set of her shoulders. "Caleb Mercer," she said, and her voice was like water over river stones, smooth and powerful, and carrying the memory of places he had never seen, but somehow recognized. "Do you remember me?" The question hit him like a physical blow. 8 years fell away in an instant, and he was no longer standing on his porch but kneeling in a dry creek bed, cradling a wounded girl in his arms while bullets sang through the air around them. She had been so small then, barely more than a child, her dark eyes wide with pain and fear as blood soaked through her buckskin dress. He had found her fleeing from a group of outlaws who had attacked her family's camp, men without honor or mercy who saw Apache lives as worth less than the horses they rode. He had killed 3 of them that day, the first men he had ever sent to meet their maker, and carried the girl through miles of unforgiving desert to an Apache settlement he had heard rumors about but never seen. The elders had regarded him with suspicion at first, this white man with blood on his hands and one of their children in his arms. But the girl had spoken for him, her voice weak but certain, telling them how he had risked his life to save hers when he could have simply ridden away. They had let him go with his life and his horse, which was more than most white men could expect from such an encounter. He had never seen the girl again, had sometimes wondered in quiet moments if she had survived her wounds, if she remembered the stranger who had stumbled into her nightmare and refused to leave her behind. Now she stood before him, no longer a wounded child, but a woman grown, beautiful in a way that made his heart ache with something he couldn't name. The scars he remembered from that terrible day were hidden now, but he could see their echo in the strength of her stance, the steel in her gaze. "Little Sparrow," he breathed, using the name the elders had called her when they took her from his arms. The woman smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise over the mountains, slow and warm and full of promise. "I am called Running Deer now," she said. "Sparrow was a child's name, and I have not been a child for many years. But yes, Caleb Mercer, I am the girl you saved in the creek bed, the girl you carried through the desert when you could have left me to die." The 2 other women dismounted then, moving to stand beside her. Up close, the resemblance was unmistakable. The same high cheekbones, the same proud bearing, the same dark eyes that seemed to see straight through to a man's soul. Sisters, he realized, 3 daughters of the same mother, 3 branches of the same strong tree. "These are my sisters," Running Deer confirmed, as if reading his thoughts. "Morning Star and Gentle Rain." They have heard the story of the white cowboy who saved their sister many times over the years. They wished to see this man for themselves. Caleb removed his hat, suddenly conscious of how he must appear to them, dusty and sun-weathered and far too long without proper civilization. "Ladies," he managed, his voice rougher than he intended, "it's an honor to make your acquaintance." The sister called Morning Star stepped forward, her eyes traveling over him with an appraising look that made heat rise to his cheeks. "Our sister speaks truth," she said. "You are, as she described, strong, kind. The look in your eyes is honest." Gentle Rain, the youngest of the 3, circled him slowly, and Caleb had the distinct impression of being examined by a mountain lion deciding whether to pounce. "Good shoulders," she observed to her sisters. "Big hands, but gentle. See how he holds his hat? A man who destroys does not hold things with such care." Caleb felt his face burn even hotter. "Now, hold on just a minute here," he said, but Running Deer cut him off with a raised hand. "We have traveled many miles to find you, Caleb Mercer. The debt my people owe you has never been repaid, and among the Apache, such debts matter greatly. We have come to honor you, to know you," and she paused, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that stopped his breath. "Perhaps to offer you something you have been missing for far too long." He stood there on his porch, 3 beautiful Apache women before him, the setting sun painting everything in shades of gold and amber, and for the first time in years, Caleb Mercer found himself completely and utterly lost for words. Before we continue, tell us where you're listening from today, and if this story has captured your attention, make sure you subscribe, because tomorrow we have something truly special waiting for you. The evening air grew cooler as the sun dipped below the distant mesas, painting the sky in ribbons of crimson and purple. Caleb stood rooted to his porch, his mind still reeling from the impossible sight before him. 8 years he had carried the memory of that wounded girl, 8 years of wondering and half-forgetting, and now here she stood, transformed into a woman who made the desert sunset seem pale by comparison. And she had brought her sisters with her, 2 more women whose beauty was matched only by the mysterious purpose that seemed to shimmer around them, like heat rising from summer stone. "You'd better come inside," he heard himself say, the words tumbling out before his better judgment could stop them. "Sun's going down, and I imagine you've been riding hard. Got coffee on the stove and beans in the pot. It ain't much, but it's honest food." Running Deer inclined her head in acceptance, and something about the gesture reminded him of the elders who had received him all those years ago, dignified and deliberate, every movement carrying meaning he could only guess at. "We accept your hospitality, Caleb Mercer. Among our people, to share food is to share trust." The inside of his ranch house was simple but clean, the home of a man who had learned to take care of himself without developing any particular talent for comfort. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, cold now in the lingering heat of late summer. Rough-hewn furniture filled the main room, a table he had built himself, chairs that didn't quite match, a worn leather settee that had seen better days. He watched the 3 sisters take in his home, suddenly seeing it through their eyes, the loneliness that hung in every corner, the absence of a woman's touch that he had never noticed until this moment. "You live alone," Morning Star observed. It was not a question. Caleb nodded, busying himself with the coffee pot to hide his discomfort. "Have for years now. Had a partner once, but he got the gold fever and headed for California. Haven't heard from him since." "And no wife?" Gentle Rain asked, settling herself into one of his chairs with a grace that made the crude furniture seem suddenly elegant. "No woman to warm this house and give you children." The directness of the question caught him off guard, though he supposed he should have expected it. Apache culture, from what little he understood, did not share the white man's habit of dancing around subjects that mattered. "No wife," he admitted, pouring coffee into tin cups and trying to keep his hands steady. "Came close once, years back. Girl from town named Sarah." but she wanted a man who'd give up the land and move east, and I couldn't see myself wearing a suit and working in some office. We parted ways friendly enough, but it never came to anything. Running Deer accepted the cup he offered, her fingers brushing against his in a touch that sent electricity racing up his arm. "Perhaps," she said softly, "you were waiting for something else. Someone else." The weight of her words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Caleb found himself staring into her dark eyes, seeing there something that frightened and thrilled him in equal measure. He had spent so many years alone, had built such careful walls around his heart, and now this woman from his past was looking at him as if those walls were made of nothing more substantial than morning mist. "Tell me why you're really here," he said finally, forcing himself to break eye contact and focus on the practical matters at hand. He set out bowls and spoons, ladling beans from the pot with movements that felt clumsy under their watchful gazes. "You didn't ride all this way just to thank me for something that happened 8 years ago." The three sisters exchanged glances, communicating in that silent way that families develop over years of shared experience. It was Morning Star who spoke first, her voice carrying the weight of something long considered and carefully decided. "Our father was chief of our band," she began. "A great man, respected by all who knew him. He led our people through many hardships, kept us safe when others fell to the soldiers and the sickness and the broken promises." Caleb nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "And now he walks with the spirits," Morning Star continued. "He passed from this world when the snow melted last spring. Before he died, he spoke of the debt owed to you. He said that honor demanded it be repaid, and he charged us with finding a way to do so." Gentle Rain leaned forward, her young face earnest and determined. "Our father believed that some souls are meant to find each other," she said, "that the spirits guide us to those we are supposed to know. He said that when you saved our sister, you became part of our family's story, whether you knew it or not." The beans sat untouched before them as Caleb tried to process what he was hearing. These women had traveled across the territory, through dangerous country where Apache faces were not welcome, to find a white cowboy who had done nothing more than what any decent man should do. The weight of their gratitude, their sense of obligation, was almost more than he could comprehend. "I didn't save your sister for any reward," he said carefully. "I did it because it was right, because I couldn't stand by and watch those animals hurt a child. You don't owe me anything." Running Deer set down her coffee cup and rose from her chair, moving toward him with a purposefulness that made his heart hammer against his ribs. "Among our people," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "a life saved creates a bond that cannot be broken. You gave me back my life, Caleb Mercer. Everything I have done since that day, every sunrise I have witnessed, every joy I have known, exists because of you." She stood before him now, close enough that he could smell the sage and wildflowers in her hair, close enough that he could see the rapid pulse beating at the base of her throat. "My sisters and I have discussed this for many moons," she continued. "We have prayed and sought guidance from the spirits, and we have come to offer you something that has never been offered to an outsider before." "What could that possibly be?" Caleb asked, though some part of him already knew, already trembled at the magnitude of what was being laid before him, like a gift from another world entirely. Running Deer smiled, and in that smile he saw the future opening before him, vast and terrifying and more beautiful than anything he had ever dared to imagine. Running Deer's smile held secrets older than the desert stones, wisdom passed down through generations of women who had learned to survive in a land that showed no mercy to the weak. She reached out and took Caleb's weathered hand in hers, her touch warm and steady, grounding him when he felt as though he might float away on the tide of his own confusion. "Among our people," she began, her voice taking on the cadence of a story told many times around flickering fires, "there is a tradition that dates back to the time when the world was young. When a man proves himself worthy through an act of great courage and selflessness, he may be offered the highest honor our women can bestow. He may be invited to join a family not through blood, but through bonds stronger than blood." Caleb's throat went dry. He wanted to speak, to ask questions, to understand what was happening, but the words tangled in his chest and refused to emerge. Morning Star and Gentle Rain had risen from their seats and now stood beside their sister, 3 women forming a half-circle around him, their presence both overwhelming and strangely comforting. "Our father saw something in you that day," Morning Star said, taking up the thread of the story. "When our sister described how you fought for her, how you carried her through the burning sun without thought for your own safety, he knew that you were not like other white men. He said your spirit was Apache, even if your skin was not. He wanted to meet you," Gentle Rain added, her young voice soft with remembered grief. "He planned to seek you out, to thank you himself and welcome you as a friend of our family. But the winters grew hard, and his strength faded, and the journey became impossible for him to make. So he charged us with this task," Running Deer finished. "Find the man who saved our daughter," he told us. "Find him and repay the debt that weighs upon our family's honor. And if he is the man I believe him to be, offer him what he has been seeking without knowing he sought it." Caleb finally found his voice, though it came out rough as sandpaper. "And what exactly do you believe I've been seeking?" The 3 sisters exchanged another of those meaningful glances, and then, to his utter astonishment, they moved closer still. Running Deer's hand remained in his, but now Morning Star placed her palm against his chest, directly over his hammering heart, while Gentle Rain rested her fingers lightly on his shoulder. "A family," Running Deer said simply. "A home that is more than walls and a roof. Someone to stand beside you when the storms come, to share your burdens and your joys, to give meaning to the days that stretch out before you like the endless desert." Caleb felt as though he had been struck by lightning. The loneliness he had carried for so long, the emptiness he had learned to ignore, suddenly rushed to the surface with a force that nearly buckled his knees. These women, these strangers who were not strangers, had seen through him in moments. They had named the hollow place inside him that he had never admitted existed, even to himself. "You're talking about marriage," he managed, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. "But there are 3 of you and only 1 of me. I don't understand what you're proposing." Morning Star laughed, a sound like bells ringing across a mountain meadow. "White men in their rigid ways," she said, though her tone was affectionate rather than mocking. "Always one man, one woman, always the same pattern, repeated without thought." "Our traditions are different," Running Deer explained. "When a man is deemed worthy, he may be welcomed into a family of sisters. He becomes husband to all, father to all children born, protector and provider, and partner in all things. It is not common, but neither is it unknown. Such arrangements have existed among our people since the beginning times." Caleb's mind reeled. The proposition was so far outside anything he had ever imagined that he could barely comprehend it. 3 wives, 3 beautiful, intelligent, capable women who were offering themselves to him not out of desperation or necessity, but out of honor and, if he read their eyes correctly, genuine interest. "This is not something we offer lightly," Gentle Rain said, her voice carrying a gravity that belied her youth. "We have watched you from afar, Caleb Mercer. We have learned of your reputation among the settlers and the native peoples alike. You are known as a man of your word, a man who deals fairly with all he meets, a man who sees Apache people as human beings worthy of respect. Such men are rare," Morning Star added, "rarer than gold in the streams, rarer than rain in the summer months. When we find one, we do not let him slip away." Caleb pulled his hand free, not roughly, but with enough force to create space between himself and the overwhelming presence of these 3 women. He walked to the window, staring out at the darkening desert, trying to gather thoughts that scattered like startled quail every time he tried to corral them. "I'm just a rancher," he said finally, his voice heavy with doubt. "I've got a few hundred head of cattle, a house that's barely fit for 1 person, and enough enemies that I sleep with a gun under my pillow. What kind of life could I offer you?" Running Deer crossed the room to stand beside him, not touching but close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "We are not afraid of hard work," she said. "We are not afraid of enemies. We have survived things that would break most people, and we have emerged stronger for the breaking." She turned him gently to face her, and in her eyes he saw not just beauty, but courage, not just desire, but determination. The question is not what you can offer us, Caleb Mercer. The question is whether you are brave enough to accept what we are offering you. Outside, the first stars were emerging in the velvet sky, ancient lights that had witnessed countless impossible things. Caleb looked from Running Deer to her sisters, 3 women who had ridden across a hostile land to find him. 3 women who saw in him something he had never seen in himself. The night deepened around the ranch house, wrapping the small building in darkness, while inside, lamplight cast dancing shadows across weathered walls. Caleb had lit the fire in the stone hearth more from habit than necessity, and now the flames crackled and popped, providing a counterpoint to the heavy silence that had fallen over the room. The 3 sisters sat on his worn settee, patient as the mountains, waiting for him to find words for the storm of emotions churning through his chest. He paced the floor like a caged animal, his boots marking a path in the dust that he had swept just that morning. Every time he looked at them, his breath caught anew. Running Deer, with her knowing eyes and quiet strength. Morning Star, with her sharp wit and appraising gaze. Gentle Rain, with her youth and earnest intensity. Together they formed something greater than the sum of their parts, a force of nature wrapped in beauty and offered to him like water to a man dying of thirst. "I need to understand something," he said finally, stopping his pacing to face them directly. "You say this is about honor, about repaying a debt. But marriage is more than a transaction. It's not like paying off a note at the bank or settling up at the general store." Running Deer rose from the settee with fluid grace, crossing to where he stood. Her sisters remained seated, watching with expressions that held both patience and something deeper, something that looked almost like hope. "You think we offer ourselves as payment," she said, her voice soft but clear. "You think we come to you as a duty, nothing more." It was not a question, but Caleb nodded anyway. The thought had crossed his mind more than once in the past hour, the idea that these women were sacrificing themselves on the altar of family honor, that whatever they said about watching him and learning his reputation was merely a polite fiction to make the arrangement more palatable. "Then you understand nothing," Running Deer said, and though her words were blunt, her tone was gentle. She reached up and touched his face, her palm warm against his stubbled cheek. "When I was a girl bleeding in that creek bed, certain I would die, you appeared like a spirit from the stories our grandmother told. You could have ridden past, you could have saved yourself the trouble and the danger. Instead, you killed men to protect me. You carried me through miles of desert that wanted nothing more than to swallow us both." Her eyes glistened in the firelight, and Caleb realized with a start that she was fighting back tears. "Do you know how many nights I dreamed of you?" she continued. "How many times I woke in darkness, reaching for a memory that felt more real than the world around me? You became the standard by which I measured all men, Caleb Mercer, and none of them ever came close." Morning Star rose now, joining her sister. "I grew up hearing the story of the white cowboy who saved Running Deer," she said. "At first I thought it was just a tale, something embellished with each telling until the truth was buried beneath layers of legend. But when I saw the scars my sister carries, when I heard her speak your name with such reverence, I knew the story was true." She moved to stand on his other side, and Caleb found himself flanked by 2 women whose presence seemed to fill the room with electricity. "When she first spoke of finding you," Morning Star continued, "I thought she was chasing a ghost. 8 years is a long time. Men move, men change, men die. But she was determined, and when Running Deer sets her mind to something, the wise choice is to follow." Gentle Rain remained on the settee, but her voice carried clearly across the room. "I was only 10 when it happened," she said. "Too young to fully understand what my sister had suffered, what she had survived. But I remember the day she came home. I remember how our mother wept and our father stood in silence, his face carved from stone as he listened to the story of her rescue. She rose then, joining her sisters until all 3 stood before him in a half-circle of feminine strength and beauty. He asked questions, Gentle Rain continued. So many questions about the man who had saved his daughter. What did he look like? How did he fight? What did he say? And when Running Deer had told him everything she could remember, our father nodded once and said, "That one has the heart of a warrior. Someday we will find him and thank him properly." The weight of their words pressed down on Caleb, not unpleasantly, but with a gravity that demanded acknowledgement. These women had not come to fulfill an obligation. They had come because somewhere along the way, in the years between that bloody day in the creek bed and this fire-lit night in his ranch house, he had become something more than a memory to them. He had become a hope, a possibility, a dream that they had carried across miles of dangerous territory to lay at his feet. "But I don't know you," he said, and the words felt inadequate even as they left his mouth. "Any of you. Marriage should be built on something more than a single act of decency 8 years gone." Running Deer smiled, and there was something almost playful in her expression now, a lightness that had been absent before. "Then learn us," she said simply. "We are not asking you to decide tonight, Caleb Mercer. We are asking you to open your heart to the possibility that what we offer is real. Stay with us," Morningstar added. "Let us show you who we are. Let us learn who you are beyond the stories and the legend. If at the end you find that you cannot accept what we offer, we will leave with our honor intact, knowing we tried. And if you find that you can accept," Gentle Rain finished, her young voice carrying a wisdom beyond her years, "then you will never be lonely again. You will have a family that fights for you as fiercely as you once fought for our sister. You will have love, Caleb Mercer. Real love, the kind that grows stronger with time instead of fading away." Caleb looked at the three of them, these daughters of a chief who had traveled so far to find him, and felt something crack open inside his chest. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, like standing at the edge of a cliff and knowing that the only way forward was to jump. "All right," he heard himself say. "Stay, show me who you are, and I'll show you who I am, the good and the bad and everything in between." Running Deer's smile widened, and beside her, Morningstar and Gentle Rain exchanged looks of quiet triumph. Outside, the desert wind whispered against the walls, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of tomorrow. The days that followed reshaped Caleb's life in ways he could never have anticipated. The three sisters made camp near his ranch house, refusing his offers to take the spare room, insisting that it would not be proper until decisions were made and ceremonies performed. They pitched a traditional dwelling 100 yards from his front porch, and each morning he woke to the sight of smoke rising from their cooking fire, a visual reminder that he was no longer alone in this vast and empty land. Running Deer proved herself invaluable with the cattle, riding alongside him through the heat of the day with an ease that put many of his hired hands to shame. She had a way with animals that bordered on the mystical, calming spooked horses with a touch and guiding stubborn steers with nothing more than a gentle word. When he asked her about it, she simply smiled and said that all creatures responded to respect, that the secret was to see them as partners rather than property. Morningstar took charge of his neglected household with an efficiency that left him speechless. Within 3 days, the ranch house had been scrubbed from floor to ceiling, the windows sparkled in the sunlight, and the perpetual layer of dust that had coated every surface had been banished to memory. She organized his pantry, mended his clothes, and somehow transformed his simple evening meals into feasts that made his mouth water just thinking about them. Gentle Rain, the youngest of the three, appointed herself guardian of his spirit. She would appear at odd moments throughout the day, bringing him water when the sun beat down mercilessly, sharing stories of her people that made him laugh or think, or sometimes both at once. Her youth masked a perceptiveness that continually caught him off guard, and he found himself confiding things to her that he had never spoken aloud to anyone. As the first week melted into the second, Caleb felt the walls he had built around his heart beginning to crumble. He caught himself watching Running Deer as she worked, admiring the graceful curve of her neck and the strength in her capable hands. He found excuses to linger in the kitchen when Morningstar was cooking, enjoying the comfortable silence between them and the occasional brush of her shoulder against his as they moved around at each other. He looked forward to Gentle Rain's visits with an eagerness that surprised him, her youthful energy and genuine interest in his life, making him feel seen in a way he had not experienced in years. But it was the evenings that truly transformed him. After the work was done and the sun had painted the sky in its nightly display of color, the four of them would gather around the fire outside the sisters' dwelling. They would share food and stories, laughter and silence, building something between them that felt more substantial than anything Caleb had ever known. One such evening, as stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, Running Deer told him about the years after her rescue. She spoke of the nightmares that had plagued her for months, the way she would wake screaming in the darkness, convinced that the outlaws had found her again. She described the slow process of healing, the patient love of her family that had gradually knitted together the torn pieces of her spirit. "You saved more than my body that day," she said, her voice soft against the crackling of the fire. "You saved something essential in me, something that those men were trying to destroy. When I thought all hope was lost, you appeared. You showed me that there was still goodness in the world, still men who would risk everything to protect the innocent." Caleb stared into the flames, uncomfortable with the weight she placed on his actions. "I just did what anyone would have done," he said, the familiar words feeling hollow even as he spoke them. "No," Morningstar countered, her voice sharp. "You did what almost no one would have done. Most white men would have ridden past. Many would have joined the attackers. You chose a different path, a harder path, and that choice defines who you are." The conversation shifted then, as it often did, to lighter topics. Gentle Rain told a story about a coyote who tried to steal the moon, making them all laugh with her animated gestures and perfectly timed pauses. Morningstar teased Caleb about the state of his barn, suggesting that it looked like a family of raccoons had been using it as a personal playground. Running Deer simply watched, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. Later, after the sisters had retired to their dwelling and Caleb lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, he allowed himself to imagine what life might look like if he accepted their offer. 3 wives seemed impossible, scandalous by the standards of the white world he had been raised in. But out here on the frontier, so far from the judgmental eyes of polite society, who was there to tell him it was wrong? He thought about waking each morning to the sound of voices other than his own, of sharing meals and burdens and joys with people who had chosen to stand beside him. He imagined children running across his land, their laughter echoing off the mesas, their lives a testament to something greater than the solitary existence he had built for himself. The dreams that came to him that night were vivid and strange, full of desert landscapes and dark-eyed women, and a future that shimmered like a mirage on the horizon. When he woke with the dawn, he found Running Deer waiting on his porch, 2 cups of coffee steaming in her hands. "You did not sleep well," she observed, handing him one of the cups. "Your light burned late into the night." "I was thinking," he admitted, settling into the chair beside her, "about your offer, about what it would mean to accept." Running Deer nodded, her expression patient. "And what conclusions have you reached?" Caleb sipped his coffee, watching the sun paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and rose. "That I'm a fool for even considering it," he said slowly, "and an even bigger fool if I let you ride away." Running Deer's face remained carefully neutral, but Caleb caught the flash of something bright and hopeful in her eyes before she schooled her expression. She set her coffee cup on the porch railing and turned to face him fully, her posture formal in a way it had not been during their more casual conversations. "You speak of acceptance," she said, her voice measured and deliberate, "but I must be certain you understand what you would be accepting. This is not something that can be undone once begun. Our traditions bind as surely as any contract signed in a white man's court, perhaps more so." Caleb nodded slowly, appreciating her caution even as impatience flickered in his chest. "I understand that much," he said, "but there's still a lot I don't understand. How would this work, practically speaking? 3 wives under one roof, 3 women sharing one husband. I've seen men struggle to keep one marriage together. How can anyone manage 3? Running Deer smiled at that, a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes and transformed her solemn beauty into something warmer and more approachable. "You think of it as 3 separate marriages," she said, 3 relationships that must be maintained in isolation from one another, but that is not how we see it. She gestured toward the dwelling where her sisters were beginning to stir, smoke rising from the morning fire. "We are not 3 women competing for your attention," she explained. We are one family, bound together long before you entered our lives. When you marry us, you do not marry three individuals. You marry a unity, a whole that is greater than its parts. The concept was foreign to everything Caleb had been taught about marriage and family, yet something about it resonated deep in his bones. He thought about the easy affection he had observed between the sisters, the way they moved around each other with practiced grace, anticipating needs before they were spoken. My sisters and I have discussed this at length, Running Deer continued. We have agreed on how we will share responsibilities, how we will divide our time with you, how we will raise children together as mothers rather than rivals. These conversations happened before we ever set out to find you, Caleb. We came prepared. And what if I favor one of you over the others? Caleb asked, voicing a concern that had nagged at him since the first night. What if feelings develop unevenly? I'm only human, Running Deer. I can't promise that my heart will divide itself into equal portions. Running Deer laughed softly, reaching out to take his hand. Do you think we expect perfection, she asked. Do you think our own hearts are so orderly that they could never grow jealous or hurt? We are human too, Caleb Mercer. We will make mistakes. We will argue and disagree and sometimes wound each other with careless words. She squeezed his fingers gently. What matters is not that we avoid all conflict, but that we face it together, that we communicate openly and honestly, that we remember why we chose this path and recommit to walking it, even when the walking grows difficult. Morning Star and Gentle Rain emerged from the dwelling then, making their way across the dusty ground to join their sister on the porch. They moved with the easy synchronicity that Caleb had come to recognize. Two women who had spent their lives learning to complement rather than compete with one another. Our sister tells us you are considering our offer, Morningstar said, her voice carefully neutral despite the curiosity burning in her eyes. We would hear your thoughts directly, if you are willing to share them. Caleb looked at the three of them, these women who had disrupted his solitary existence and awakened longings he had thought permanently buried. The morning sun caught the beadwork on their clothing, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the weathered porch boards. I spent most of last night awake, he admitted, thinking about what you're offering, what it would mean for my life, whether I'm capable of being the kind of man you deserve. Gentle Rain stepped forward, her young face earnest and open. You speak as though worthiness is something you must prove, she said, but you have already proven it. 8 years ago, in a creek bed miles from here, you showed us what kind of man you are. Everything since then has only confirmed what we already knew. The conviction in her voice was almost overwhelming. Caleb felt the last of his resistance crumbling, washed away by the tide of their collective certainty. There will be difficulties, he said, more to himself than to them. People in town won't understand. Some of them won't accept it, might even turn violent. We have faced worse, Morningstar said simply. Our people have been fighting for survival since before your grandparents were born. A few disapproving settlers do not frighten us. And my ranch, Caleb continued, it's not much. The house is small, the work is hard, the profits are never guaranteed. Some years I barely scrape by. Running Deer smiled that warm smile again. We did not come seeking wealth, she said. We came seeking a man worth standing beside. We found him. The sun had climbed higher now, burning off the morning chill and promising another hot day. Caleb looked out at his land, the rolling hills dotted with cattle, the distant mountains standing sentinel on the horizon. For years this place had been his refuge from a world that had never quite made sense to him. Now it might become something more, a home in the truest sense of the word. All right, he said, and his voice carried a steadiness that surprised him. I accept. Not because I feel I deserve you, but because I'd be a fool to turn away from the best thing that's ever happened to me. The sisters exchanged glances, and then, moving as one, they surrounded him. Running Deer took his right hand, Morningstar his left, while Gentle Rain placed her palm against his back. He felt their warmth encircling him, their strength supporting him, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Caleb Mercer did not feel alone. There are ceremonies to perform, Running Deer said, her voice thick with emotion. Words to be spoken, promises to be made. But in our hearts, this moment is the true beginning. The ceremony took place 3 days later, on a moonlit night when the desert seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The sisters had spent those intervening days preparing, gathering sacred herbs and crafting ceremonial items according to traditions passed down through countless generations. Caleb watched their preparations with a mixture of fascination and nervous energy, understanding that he was about to participate in something ancient and profound. They chose a flat stretch of land behind the ranch house, a natural clearing ringed by mesquite trees whose gnarled branches reached toward the stars like supplicating hands. Running Deer had explained that the ceremony needed to take place under open sky, where the spirits could witness and bless the union. Caleb had simply nodded, long past the point of questioning anything these remarkable women told him. As the moon rose fat and silver over the eastern mountains, the three sisters emerged from their dwelling dressed in ceremonial clothing that stole Caleb's breath away. Running Deer wore white doeskin, decorated with intricate beadwork that caught the moonlight and scattered it like fallen stars. Morning Star's dress was similar but adorned with symbols that represented strength and protection. Gentle Rain, the youngest, wore a gown of softer hue, her hair braided with ribbons and feathers that danced in the gentle breeze. Caleb stood waiting in the clearing, wearing his best shirt and cleanest trousers, feeling woefully inadequate in comparison to their radiant beauty. But when Running Deer smiled at him across the firelit space, he felt something settle in his chest, a rightness that pushed aside his insecurities and left only quiet certainty in their place. The ceremony itself was unlike anything Caleb had experienced or imagined. There were no priests or witnesses beyond the desert itself, no exchange of rings or signing of documents. Instead, the sisters led him through a series of rituals that felt both foreign and familiar, as though he was remembering something his soul had always known, but his mind had forgotten. They circled the fire together, hands joined, while Running Deer chanted in her native tongue. The words were incomprehensible to Caleb, but their meaning somehow transcended language, filling the night air with promises of partnership and loyalty and love that would endure beyond the boundaries of a single lifetime. Morning Star presented him with a knife she had crafted herself, its blade sharp and gleaming, its handle wrapped in leather and decorated with copper wire. "This represents protection," she explained, her voice solemn. "As our husband, you take on the responsibility of defending our family against all threats. Do you accept this burden?" "I accept," Caleb replied, and the words felt like a vow carved in stone. Gentle Rain stepped forward next, offering a small pouch filled with seeds. "This represents provision," she said. "As our husband, you take on the responsibility of ensuring our family never knows hunger or want. Do you accept this burden?" "I accept," Caleb said again, and the second vow joined the first in his heart. Finally, Running Deer approached, and in her hands she held nothing at all. Her palms were empty, turned upward toward the moon, and Caleb understood without being told that her gift was different from her sister's. "This represents love," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I offer you nothing that can be held or measured, nothing that can be taken or lost. I offer you only myself, my heart, my spirit, my devotion for as long as breath remains in my body. Do you accept this gift?" The question hung in the air between them, and Caleb felt the weight of it pressing down on his shoulders. This was the true test, the moment that would define everything that followed. He looked into Running Deer's eyes and saw there a vulnerability she had never shown before, a fear that even now, at the final moment, he might turn away. "I accept," he said, and his voice rang clear across the clearing. "I accept all of you, everything you are, and everything you will become. I accept the burdens and the gifts, the responsibilities and the joys. From this moment forward, my life is bound to yours." The sisters surrounded him then, their arms wrapping around him in an embrace that felt like coming home after years of wandering. He felt tears on his cheeks, though whether they were his own or belonged to the women holding him, he could not say and did not care. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling toward the stars. The moon continued its slow journey across the sky, indifferent to the promises being made beneath its silver gaze. But something had shifted in the fabric of the world. Some invisible thread had been woven that would not easily be broken. Later, as they sat together around the dying fire, Running Deer produced a small leather pouch from the folds of her dress. "There is one more tradition," she said, her voice warm with contentment. "On the wedding night, the husband receives a gift from his wives, something that represents their commitment to the life they will build together." She opened the pouch and withdrew a necklace, a simple leather cord strung with 3 beads of turquoise, each one a slightly different shade of blue. "These stones came from our grandmother," she explained, placing the necklace over Caleb's head and settling it against his chest. "She wore them on her wedding day, and her mother before her, and her mother before her, back through more generations than anyone can count." The beads were cool against his skin, but they seemed to warm quickly, as though absorbing the heat of his body and making it their own. Caleb touched them gently, overwhelmed by the significance of what he had been given. 3 stones for 3 wives, Morning Star added, bound together on a single cord, just as we are now bound together in a single family. Gentle Rain leaned her head against his shoulder, her earlier formality melted away by the intimacy of the ceremony they had shared. "Welcome to our family, Caleb Mercer," she murmured. "Welcome home." The word echoed in his mind as the fire burned down to embers and the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Home. After so many years of solitude, so many nights of wondering if he would ever belong anywhere, he had finally found it. The first test of their unconventional marriage came sooner than any of them had anticipated. Word of Caleb's union with the 3 Apache sisters spread through the territory like wildfire carried on a dry wind, and the reactions ranged from curious fascination to outright hostility. Some of the ranchers who had considered Caleb a friend now looked at him with barely concealed disgust, their eyes sliding away when he rode into town for supplies. It was Jacob Thornton who brought the trouble to Caleb's doorstep, riding up to the ranch house 3 weeks after the ceremony with a group of 8 men armed with rifles and righteous indignation. Thornton owned the largest spread in the county, a man whose influence extended from the territorial governor's office to the smallest general store. He had never liked Caleb, viewing the younger rancher's independence as a personal affront. The sisters were inside the house when the riders appeared on the horizon, and Caleb moved quickly to the porch, positioning himself between the approaching threat and his family. He wore his gun belt and carried the knife Morning Star had given him, though he prayed he would need neither. "Mercer," Thornton called out as he reined his horse to a stop at the edge of Caleb's property. "We need to have words with you." "Then speak," Caleb replied, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his gut. "You've ridden a long way to talk." Thornton's face twisted with barely contained contempt. "There are decent folks in this territory," he said, "folks who came here to build something civilized out of this wilderness. What you've done, taking up with those savages, it's an abomination. An insult to every God-fearing Christian settler in the county." Caleb felt anger flare hot in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. "What I do on my own land, with women who came to me of their own free will, is nobody's business but mine." One of the men behind Thornton spat into the dust. "Free will," he scoffed. "Everyone knows how those Apache women operate. Probably bewitched you with some heathen magic. No white man in his right mind would choose to bed down with 3 squaws otherwise." The word hit Caleb like a physical blow, and he felt his hand move toward his gun before he consciously stopped it. Behind him, he heard the creak of the door opening and knew without looking that the sisters had emerged onto the porch. "You will not use that word to describe my wives," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Not now, not ever." Thornton laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Your wives," he repeated mockingly. "You think any court in this territory would recognize such a union? You think you can flaunt your depravity and expect the rest of us to simply accept it?" Running Deer stepped forward to stand beside Caleb, her chin lifted with quiet dignity. "We are married according to the traditions of my people," she said. "Traditions that existed long before your ancestors ever set foot on this land. Your courts and your churches mean nothing to us." The men shifted uncomfortably, several of them clearly unsettled by the composed way this Apache woman addressed them. Thornton's face darkened further, his hand dropping to rest on the butt of his revolver. "I've got half a mind to burn this place to the ground," he said. "Teach you what happens to race traders in this territory. And I've got a Winchester rifle trained on your chest right now." Morning Star called from somewhere behind Caleb, along with sisters who never miss what they aim at. "You would be dead before your hand cleared leather." Thornton's eyes widened as he realized his tactical error. He had been so focused on intimidation that he had forgotten to account for all the players on the board. A quick glance revealed Gentle Rain at an upper window, her rifle barrel glinting in the sunlight. The standoff stretched for an eternal moment, tension crackling between the two groups like lightning seeking ground. Caleb could feel his heart pounding against his ribs, could see the sweat beading on Thornton's forehead as the older man calculated his odds. It was one of Thornton's men who broke the impasse, a younger rider who Caleb recognized as the son of a local merchant. "Jacob," he said quietly, "this ain't worth dying over. Man wants to live his life different from ours. That's between him and God. We got no call to start a war over it." The words seemed to puncture Thornton's rage, releasing the pressure that had been building toward violence. He glared at Caleb with undisguised hatred, but his hand moved away from his weapon. "This isn't over," he promised. "Your land borders mine on the North Ridge. There's going to come a time when you need help, when the winter gets hard or the cattle get sick or the Apache raiders come calling, and when that time comes, you'll find every door in this territory closed to you." He wheeled his horse around and spurred it toward the horizon, his men following in a cloud of dust and muttered curses. Caleb stood on his porch until they disappeared from sight, his body slowly releasing the tension that he had coiled through every muscle. Running Deer's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his own. "That will not be the last of them," she said softly. "I know," Caleb replied. Morning Star descended from her position, the rifle still cradled in her capable hands. "We should prepare," she said. "Men like that do not make empty threats. They will find ways to make our lives difficult." "Then we'll face it together," Caleb said, looking at each of his wives in turn. "Whatever comes, we face it as a family." Gentle Rain joined them on the porch, her young face serious but unafraid. "Our people have survived worse than angry ranchers," she said. "We have survived disease and soldiers and broken treaties. We will survive this too." Caleb pulled them all close, wrapping his arms around the three women who had transformed his life so completely. The threat from Thornton was real and would likely grow worse before it got better. But standing there with his wives pressed against him, their strength mingling with his own, he could not bring himself to regret a single choice that had led him to this moment. The winter that followed was the hardest Caleb had ever endured, though not because of the weather. True to his word, Jacob Thornton had poisoned every well of goodwill in the territory. The general store in town suddenly found itself unable to extend credit to the Mercer Ranch. The blacksmith claimed he was too busy to shoe Caleb's horses. Even the circuit preacher, who had once shared coffee and conversation whenever he passed through, now rode past the ranch without stopping. But Thornton's campaign of isolation had unexpected consequences. Cut off from the white community that had never fully accepted them anyway, Caleb and his wives turned inward, strengthening the bonds between them until their small family became a fortress of mutual support and love. The sisters taught Caleb skills he had never thought to learn: how to tan hides and preserve meat, how to read the subtle signs of weather and the behavior of animals, how to find water in land that appeared completely dry. In turn, Caleb shared what he knew of ranching and business, teaching his wives to read the ledgers and understand the complex web of transactions that kept the ranch solvent. Morning Star proved particularly adept at numbers, her sharp mind cutting through calculations that had always given Caleb headaches. Within months, she had reorganized his entire bookkeeping system, saving hours of labor and identifying inefficiencies he had never noticed. The cattle thrived that winter despite everything, producing a healthy crop of calves that would fetch good prices come spring. Caleb began to believe that they might actually weather Thornton's vendetta, that their self-sufficiency and determination would be enough to see them through. It was Running Deer who first noticed the signs that their troubles were far from over. She returned from checking the north fence line one afternoon with worry creasing her beautiful face, reporting that she had found evidence of cattle being moved through the narrow canyon that connected their land to Thornton's spread. Rustlers, Caleb said grimly when she told him, or made to look like rustlers anyway. Morningstar nodded, her expression hard. Thornton cannot defeat us through isolation alone, so now he turns to theft. If he can bleed away our herd piece by piece, eventually we will have nothing left. They organized night watches, taking turns patrolling the vulnerable sections of the property while the others slept. The work was exhausting, adding hours of vigilance to days already full of labor, but the rustling stopped as quickly as it had started. For a few weeks, Caleb allowed himself to hope that the threat had passed. The fire started on a moonless night in late February, when the wind howled down from the mountains and carried sparks like malevolent stars. Caleb woke to Gentle Rain's frantic shaking, her young voice tight with fear as she told him the barn was burning. By the time he reached the yard, flames were climbing toward the sky, painting the darkness in shades of orange and crimson. They fought the fire together, forming a bucket chain from the well to the barn, their faces streaked with soot and sweat as they battled the inferno. The horses had already been released by Morningstar's quick thinking, but the winter's store of hay was a total loss, along with tools and equipment that would be difficult and expensive to replace. As dawn broke over the smoldering ruins, Caleb found the evidence he had expected but dreaded. Boot prints in the soft earth near the barn's back wall, and the distinctive smell of kerosene beneath the char and ash. This had been no accident, no random act of nature. Someone had deliberately set out to destroy everything he had built. Running Deer stood beside him as he surveyed the damage, her hand resting on his arm in silent support. "He could burn us out completely," she said quietly. "If the fire had spread to the house while we slept, we might all have died." The thought sent ice through Caleb's veins. He had been willing to endure hardship for the sake of his unconventional marriage, had accepted that his choices would bring consequences he could not fully control. But this was different. This was attempted murder, an attack not just on his property, but on the lives of the women he had sworn to protect. "We cannot let this stand," Morningstar said, her voice hard as the steel of her rifle barrel. "If we show weakness now, he will only grow bolder." Gentle Rain nodded, her young face set with determination that belied her years. "Our father taught us that bullies must be confronted," she said, "that running from a threat only ensures it will follow you forever." Caleb looked at his 3 wives, these women who had ridden across hostile territory to find him, who had offered him their hearts and their lives without reservation. They deserved better than to live in fear, constantly looking over their shoulders for the next attack. They deserved peace and safety, and the chance to build the future they had dreamed of together. "I'm going to see Thornton," he said, his voice flat and final. "This ends today, one way or another." Running Deer stepped in front of him, her dark eyes blazing. "Then we go together," she said. "You are our husband, and his fight is our fight. We will not let you face this alone." For a moment, Caleb wanted to argue, to insist that they stay behind where it was safe, but he saw the resolve in their faces and knew that trying to protect them by excluding them would be the worst betrayal he could commit. These were not delicate flowers to be sheltered from the storm. These were warriors in their own right, women who had chosen to stand beside him, knowing full well what that choice might cost. "Together then," he agreed. "We ride together, and we end this together." They armed themselves in silence, checking weapons and gathering supplies with the grim efficiency of soldiers preparing for battle. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last wisps of smoke from the ruined barn, as Caleb and his 3 wives mounted their horses and turned toward the north ridge. Whatever waited for them at Thornton's ranch, they would face it, as they faced everything now. As a family, bound by love and ceremony and the unbreakable conviction that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The ride to Thornton's ranch took less than an hour, but it felt like a journey across lifetimes. Caleb rode at the front with Running Deer beside him, while Morningstar and Gentle Rain flanked them on either side. They made no attempt at stealth, approaching the sprawling compound in plain view of the sentries posted at its borders. Whatever happened next would happen in the light of day, witnessed by all who cared to watch. Thornton emerged from his grand house before they reached the yard, alerted by his men to the approaching riders. He stood on his wide porch with a rifle cradled in his arms, his face twisted with surprise and something that might have been fear beneath the bravado. "You've got nerve coming here, Mercer," he called out as they reined their horses to a stop, "especially bringing your squaws along. You looking to die today?" Caleb dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible and away from his weapons. "I'm here to end this, Thornton. You burned my barn last night. Could have killed my family. This feud of yours has gone too far." Thornton laughed, but there was a nervous edge to the sound. "I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe you should be more careful with your lanterns." Running Deer spoke then, her voice carrying clearly across the dusty yard. "We found kerosene and boot prints. Your men were careless in their hatred. The evidence of your crime is plain for anyone who cares to look." Several of Thornton's hands shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances that suggested not all of them had been aware of their employer's nighttime activities. One man in particular, an older cowboy with a weathered face and honest eyes, stepped slightly away from the group. "Is that true, Jacob?" he asked, his voice rough with disapproval. "You sent boys to burn a man's barn while his family slept inside?" Thornton's face reddened with fury. "Shut your mouth, Henderson. What I do to protect decent folks from degenerates like Mercer is none of your concern." "It is when it crosses the line into murder," Henderson replied. "I signed on to work cattle, not to kill women in their beds." The fracture in Thornton's ranks was spreading, visible now in the way his men grouped themselves. Some stood firmly behind their employer, hands resting on weapons, loyalty or fear keeping them in place. But others drifted toward Henderson, their expressions troubled, unwilling to be party to the violence Thornton was clearly contemplating. Caleb seized the moment, stepping forward with his hands still raised. "I didn't come here to fight," he said, pitching his voice to carry to everyone present. "I came to make something clear. My wives and I aren't going anywhere. We're not selling, we're not leaving, and we're not going to be intimidated into giving up what's ours." He let his gaze sweep across the assembled men, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "Most of you know me," he continued. "You know I deal fair and keep my word. You know I've never cheated a man or gone back on a promise. What you might not know is that the woman standing beside me, Running Deer, saved my soul 8 years ago without even knowing it." He told them the story then, the whole story, from the moment he found a wounded girl in a creek bed to the ceremony that had bound them together under the desert moon. He spoke of honor and debt, of traditions older than any of them could comprehend, of love that had grown from the most unexpected soil and blossomed into something beautiful and true. When he finished, the silence was absolute. Even Thornton seemed momentarily stunned by the raw honesty in Caleb's voice, the obvious depth of feeling that colored every word. It was Morning Star who broke the spell, stepping forward to stand beside her husband. "We came here willing to fight if necessary," she said, "but we would prefer peace. All we ask is to be left alone to live our lives as we choose. Is that truly so much to ask?" Henderson removed his hat and ran a hand through his graying hair. "Not from where I'm standing," he said quietly. "Man's got a right to love who he loves, long as everyone's willing. Ain't none of my business beyond that." One by one, others nodded their agreement. The tide had turned and Thornton could see it happening, his power base crumbling as his men chose conscience over loyalty. "This isn't over," he snarled, but his voice had lost its conviction. The words were the empty threat of a defeated man grasping at shadows. "Yes, it is," Caleb replied calmly. "It's over because your own people have seen you for what you are, a bully and a coward who burns barns in the night because he can't win in the daylight." He mounted his horse and looked down at Thornton one final time. "Stay away from my land and my family. There won't be another warning." They rode home in the golden light of late afternoon, the weight of conflict finally lifting from their shoulders. Running Deer reached across the space between their horses to take Caleb's hand, her smile radiant with relief and love. "You spoke well," she said. "You spoke from the heart, and they heard you." "I just told the truth," Caleb replied. Seemed like it was time someone did. The ranch house came into view, still standing despite everything, smoke rising from the chimney where someone had left a fire burning. The ruined barn was a scar on the landscape, but already Caleb was planning its replacement, imagining the structure they would build together to take its place. That night, as stars emerged in the vast desert sky, the four of them sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill. Running Deer rested her head on Caleb's shoulder, while a morning star hummed a soft melody, and gentle rain pointed out constellations her grandmother had taught her to recognize. "There will be other challenges," Running Deer murmured. "Other people who cannot accept what we have built." "Let them come," Caleb replied, tightening his arms around his wives. "Whatever happens, we face it together." The desert wind whispered across the land, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of spring. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, a wild sound that seemed to bless the unconventional family huddled together against the darkness. Caleb Mercer had spent years believing he was destined to walk alone. Now, surrounded by three women who had crossed a hostile world to find him, he understood that some gifts were too precious to question, too miraculous to doubt. He had saved one Apache girl on a desperate day, and in return, she and her sisters had saved him from a lifetime of solitude. It was, he thought as sleep began to claim him, the best trade he had ever made. That concludes the story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Caleb and his three Apache wives. If this tale touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Drop a comment below telling us what you thought of Running Deer, Morning Star, and Gentle Rain. Until next time, may your own trails lead you to unexpected love.